The rain hammered the windshield of my beat-up truck, each drop a tiny explosion against the glass. As I pulled into the gravel lot of a sagging apartment complex in rural Ohio. My name's Ethan, a 28-year-old handyman who'd rather wrestle a broken doorframe than face the chaos of my own heart. Tonight, though, something felt different, a prickle of fate in the humid air. I grabbed my toolbox, the weight of it grounding me, and trudged up the creaking stairs to apartment 3B. The call had come late. A frantic voicemail about a door that wouldn't shut right. I knocked, expecting the usual frazzled tenant. Maybe a single mom or an old retiree. But when the door cracked open, my breath caught. He stood there, all sharp cheekbones and messy auburn hair, his green eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. "You Ethan?" he asked, voice soft but rough, like he'd been crying. "Yeah," I managed, my throat tight. "Here to fix your door?" His name was Caleb, he said, and as I stepped inside, the air shifted like the world had tilted just enough to throw me off balance. His apartment was a mess of contradictions. Paint-splattered canvases leaned against walls, half-finished sketches scattered on a coffee table. But the furniture was sparse, like he'd just moved in or didn't plan to stay. The door in question hung crooked, its hinges screaming for mercy. I set to work, but Caleb didn't leave me alone like most clients. He hovered, not intrusive, just present. "You do this a lot?" he asked, leaning against the counter, his paint-stained fingers fidgeting with a pencil. "Fix doors?" "Yeah. Keeps the lights on," I said, trying to focus on the screwdriver in my hand. But his gaze burned into me. Curious, searching, like he saw something I didn't. I wasn't used to being looked at not like that. Growing up in a small town, I'd learned to keep my head down, to bury the part of me that ached for something more than the life I'd been handed. Being a handyman was safe. No questions, no complications. Caleb, though, was a complication. He talked while I worked, his voice weaving stories about art school, about leaving Chicago after a bad breakup, about how this apartment was his fresh start. I nodded, grunting responses, but every word he said felt like a hook sinking deeper into my chest. "You ever feel like you're running from something?" he asked suddenly, his eyes locking onto mine. I froze, the screwdriver slipping in my hand. "Yeah," I admitted, before I could stop myself. "All the time." He didn't push, but the silence that followed was heavy, electric. I finished the door, testing it to make sure it swung smoothly, but I didn't want to leave. "Not yet." "You're good at this," Caleb said, stepping closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fixing things. Only the easy stuff," I said, my heart pounding. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside that tiny apartment ceased to exist. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wasn't ready for it to end. As I packed up my tools, Caleb handed me a rough pencil drawing of a door, half open, with light spilling through. "For you," he said, his fingers brushing mine. My skin burned where he touched me, and I mumbled something about getting back to my truck. But as I stepped into the rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just walked through a door I couldn't close. The next day, I found myself back at his complex. Not for a job, but because I couldn't stop thinking about him. His apartment door was ajar, and I knocked, my pulse racing. Caleb answered, paint smudged on his cheek, and smiled like he'd been waiting for me. "Back so soon?" he teased, but there was something fragile in his eyes, like he was afraid I'd disappear. We talked for hours that night, sitting on his threadbare couch, the rain still drumming outside. He told me about his ex, a guy who'd torn his confidence to shreds. And I found myself opening up about my own past, about the father who'd called me a disappointment when I came out at 17. About the years I'd spent hiding who I was. Caleb listened. Really listened. And when he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Days turned into weeks, and I found excuses to stop by, fixing a leaky faucet, patching a wall, anything to see him. Each visit chipped away at the walls I'd built around myself. Caleb's laugh, his quiet courage, the way he saw beauty in broken things, it was like he was fixing me, piece by piece. But I was terrified. I'd spent so long running from myself, from love, that letting him in felt like stepping off a cliff. One night, as we sat on his balcony under a sky bruised with stars, Caleb turned to me, his expression serious. "Ethan, what are we doing?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Because it's real, isn't it?" I wanted to say yes, to tell him he was the first thing in years that felt like home. But fear clawed at me, whispering that this couldn't last, that I'd ruin it. Before I could answer, a car screeched into the lot below, headlights cutting through the dark. Caleb's face paled. "That's him," he whispered. "My ex. He's back." Caleb's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. I followed his gaze to the parking lot, where a man stepped out of a sleek black car, his silhouette sharp against the sodium glow of the streetlights. "His name's Marcus," Caleb said, his voice barely audible. "He wasn't supposed to find me." I didn't know what to say, but the protectiveness surging through me was new, raw. I grabbed Caleb's hand, pulling him back inside. "Tell me what's going on," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He hesitated, then spilled it all. Marcus, his ex, had been controlling, manipulative, the kind of guy who'd made Caleb feel small. When Caleb left Chicago, he thought he'd escaped. But Marcus had a way of finding him, always pulling him back into that toxic orbit. "He's not dangerous," Caleb said, but his trembling hands betrayed him. "He just doesn't let go." I wanted to believe him, but the way Marcus lingered in the lot, staring up at the balcony, sent ice down my spine. I stayed that night, sleeping on the couch, my toolbox by the door like a silent promise to keep Caleb safe. But Marcus didn't leave. Over the next few days, he became a shadow parked outside the complex, calling Caleb's phone, leaving notes slipped under the door. Each one was a plea, dripping with charm, but I saw the threat beneath the words. Caleb tried to stay strong, but I could see him unraveling, his confidence fading with every unanswered call. I wasn't much better. My own fears were clawing their way up. Memories of my father's rejection, of every time I'd let myself hope only to be crushed. Loving Caleb was a risk I wasn't sure I could take. But watching him shrink under Marcus's shadow made me realize I couldn't walk away either. So I did what I knew best. I fixed things. I changed Caleb's locks, installed a deadbolt, even convinced the landlord to put up a security camera. But Marcus was relentless, and Caleb's fear was a blade twisting in my gut. One evening, as I was leaving Caleb's place, Marcus was waiting by my truck. He was all polished charm-tailored jacket, slicked back hair, but his eyes were cold, Predatory. You're the handyman. Huh? He said, smirking. Caleb's got a type. You know he'll get bored. Right. He always comes back to me. My fists clenched, but I kept my voice level. He's done with you. Move on. Marcus laughed, stepping closer, his breath hot with whiskey. You think you're enough for him. You're nothing. Just a guy with a wrench. I wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face. But I thought of Caleb, of the way he'd looked at me that first night, like I was more than just a handyman. I turned and walked away, but Marcus's words burrowed into me, feeding my doubts. Back at Caleb's, I found him curled up on the couch, a sketchpad in his lap. He was drawing in a portrait of me. My face softened in a way I didn't recognize. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head, tears brimming. I thought I was stronger than this, he said. But Marcus, he makes me feel like I'm nothing. You're not nothing, I said, my voice fierce. You're everything. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and Caleb looked at me, his eyes wide with hope and fear. I kissed him then, soft at first, then desperate, like I could pour all my strength into him. He kissed me back, his hands gripping my shirt, and for a moment, it was just us, no Marcus, no past, no fear. But the world doesn't stop for love. The next morning, Caleb's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. I'm not leaving without you. Attached was a photo of my truck, its tires slashed. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about Caleb and Marie, it was about me, too. Marcus was marking his territory, and I was in his way. I called a friend to tow my truck, but the real damage was done. Caleb was a wreck, blaming himself, and I was spiraling, torn between protecting him and running from the chaos. We should go to the police, I said, but Caleb shook his head. He'll twist it. He always does. That night, we made a plan. Caleb would block Marcus's number, and I'd stay with him until things calmed down. But as we sat together, his head on my shoulder, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Marcus wasn't going to let go, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to hold on. The tension in Caleb's apartment was a living thing, coiling tighter with every passing day. Marcus's presence lingered like a storm cloud, his car appearing at odd hours, his notes growing bolder. But something else was growing too between Caleb and me. A fragile, beautiful thing that felt worth fighting for. I wasn't a hero, just a guy who fixed things. But for Caleb, I wanted to be more. One night, everything snapped. I was at Caleb's, helping him hang a new painting, when the power cut out. The apartment plunged into darkness, and Caleb's hand found mine, his grip tight. It's him, he whispered. I didn't question it. I grabbed a flashlight from my toolbox and checked the windows. Sure enough, Marcus's car was in the lot, idling. My blood boiled. This had to end. We're done hiding, I said, my voice low. Caleb nodded, his jaw set, and for the first time, I saw the fire in him reignite. We called the police, reporting Marcus's harassment, and while we waited, I held Caleb close, promising him we'd get through this. The cops came, took our statements, and issued a warning to Marcus. It wasn't enough to lock him up, but it was a start. The next day, Caleb surprised me. He'd contacted a lawyer friend from Chicago, who helped him file a restraining order. "I'm done running," he said, his voice steady. "I want a life with you." My heart swelled, but fear still gnawed at me. What if I wasn't enough? What if Marcus was right, and Caleb deserved better? Weeks passed, and the restraining order held Marcus at bay. Caleb's apartment became our sanctuary, filled with laughter, late-night talks, and stolen kisses. I started dreaming of a future, something I'd never dared to do. But Marcus wasn't gone. One evening, as I walked to my truck, I found a note taped to the windshield. "You can't keep him." My stomach churned, but I didn't tell Caleb. He was finally smiling again, and I wouldn't let Marcus steal that. Then came the night that changed everything. Caleb had invited me to an art gallery in town, his first show since moving to Ohio. His paintings were raw, vivid, telling stories of pain and hope. I stood in the crowd, watching him shine, and realized I was in love with him completely, terrifyingly. As he spoke to the guests, his eyes kept finding mine, and I knew he felt it too. But Marcus was there. He slipped into the gallery, ignoring the restraining order, his presence a violation of everything Caleb had built. I saw him before Caleb did, his smirk cutting through the crowd. I moved fast, stepping between them, my voice low. "Leave. Now." Marcus laughed, but there was no charm left, just desperation. "He'll never be yours," he spat. Caleb saw us then, his face paling, but he didn't back down. He walked over, took my hand, and faced Marcus. "I'm done with you," he said, his voice clear. "I choose Ethan." The words hit me like a wave, washing away my doubts. Marcus lunged, but security grabbed him, dragging him out as he shouted threats. The aftermath was messy police reports, court dates, but Caleb and I faced it together. Marcus was charged with violating the restraining order, and though he'd likely be back, we were stronger. That night, back in Caleb's apartment, we stood by the door I'd fixed all those months ago. "You changed everything," Caleb said, his eyes soft. "Not just the door." I kissed him, slow and sure, knowing this was our beginning. We weren't perfect, and the world wasn't kind, but we'd found something worth fighting for. As we held each other, the rain outside softened to a drizzle, and I realized that sometimes fixing a door is just the start of fixing a life.